What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Water for the Thirsty. I am the facilitator of the conversation. My name is Jared, and of course, with us tonight we have Courtney and Jerome. I'm expecting Lauren in a minute, and I think Cliff is going to be with us as well. So we'll have a small crew with us today. Here to chop it up in the Word, following a Bible reading plan, and the conversation is coming from stories about the kings, because I think we transitioned from Solomon into Jeroboam and then the other kings this week. We closed out John as well this week, so we got to be in that gospel. And then we did Psalms, the book of Psalms, and yeah, we're still in there. We're about to close that out when we get into July. So we read some of Solomon's writings and got some wisdom and talked about wisdom and those kinds of things. So our conversation is coming from there. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I know Courtney was, just before we came on, was talking about something that he was reading that's slightly adjacent to what we've been in the Bible reading. So I want to give him a chance to just kind of surface that so we could talk through it before we actually get into the Bible reading plan stuff.
All right, let me unmute myself. All right. Yeah, Jerome. So I was telling Jared, man, I talked to a lot of some of my boys from college about just relationships and marriage and so forth, and just the current state of I guess the trends nowadays. So in my conversations and in some of the things I've been reading, I came across this quote from a book by Barry Schwartz. He's a psychologist, and the book's name is The Paradox of Choice. The quote said, "The existence of multiple alternatives makes it easy for us to imagine alternatives that don't exist, alternatives that combine the features of the ones that do exist. And to the extent that we engage our imagination in this way, we will be even less satisfied with the alternative we end up choosing. So once again, a greater variety of choices actually makes us feel worse." So I was trying to, as I was thinking about it, I was just like, man, how does that relate to our relationship with God and that same choice that He's given us, that power of choice, and how we navigate with that.
Jerry, I saw your mind going somewhere when you heard the quote.
It's going here. Let me come back to me. Let me reel my mind back. Oh,
Read it one more time, Courtney.
Sure.
wow.
The existence of multiple alternatives makes it easy for us to imagine alternatives that don't exist, alternatives that combine the features of the ones that do exist. And to the extent that we engage our imagination in this way, we
Hmm.
will be even less satisfied with the alternative we end up choosing. So, once again, a greater variety of choices actually makes us feel worse.
Yeah, I co-sign that.
Yep.
And I talk about. So I have been a champion of groups because they came out of they were functionally efficient for the objectives in which we were setting up to do. But I always hated sunshine bands. I always hated dividing up in groups, and I hated. Not, I strongly disliked Sabbath school classes, multiple Sabbath school classes in the same room, because there's so much choice of teacher conversation going on that And sometimes I always get stuck in the conversation where I end up having to drive and I don't get to sit and be a part of the interesting conversation, or maybe the cool kids class or whatever. So for me, it was always better to let's not have all of this choice. When I come in the room and there are 4 classes and I have to decide, how about if we only have one teacher, one class, and we combine it? Yeah. Yeah, when there are too many choices, yeah.
You know, I see that. I mean, even using the same example, Jared. What I've seen people do is they would gravitate towards the teachers that are more like are less like sounding boards and more like what is it, an echo chamber. So they would gravitate to the people who always would second what they say, or who they would second what that person says. So there's not much real meaningful dialogue or opportunity to learn, to grow, to challenge, because it's a bunch of yes men in the same class essentially, right?
Right.
Where my mind went, of course, is because this is in the context of relationships as well, and it's funny how you like to think if you have more options, you would make a better choice. It's really not the case. And then, I mean, although that's what society is pushing, right? I mean, you'd hear things like guys say, "No, man, you need to travel the world, you need to go to Brazil, you need to whatever." Been there, done that, yawn. But what really had me thinking is, I do see how it it can play on your imagination, and you start. So you might have 5 choices, and you start making 6, 7, 8, 9 out of them, and then it just leads to dissatisfaction, right? Because when you finally choose, you've created so many ideals in your head that now when you have something real and substantive and whatnot, because it doesn't match up to the ideal in so many ways that you've created, it's like you're never satisfied.
Yeah, that's also why I like buffets over restaurants with a menu. Like I don't like to go to Indian restaurants when they're not a menu because I have to make a choice.
Mhm.
When I go in a buffet, whatever looks good in that moment, I can actually see it because when it's written on the paper and it's on the menu, you don't
Yeah,
actually know what it looks like.
yeah,
So unless you see in the plate passing in front of you and you go, oh, that, because
yeah.
you saw the size, you saw what it looks like, you saw the color combinations, you saw the materials that are in it. Yeah, I want that. You know, so I say that to say sometimes as the reading was the quote was suggesting, you start to combine things and now you start to weigh, well, I have this and that, but I also like this and that. And so which
I,
one will satisfy me the most, right? Because if I go with the avocado and the pepper jack cheese, that'll be good. But oh, this one over here has, you know, something else that I like as well, but it's not included here. Can I get
yeah.
them to add this over here? No, I have to choose between the two because they can't, in some of them instances they can't substitute. So I feel the dilemma that they reference in terms of the combination and then the dissatisfaction because you feel like you're leaving something on the table. Whereas when you go by the doubles, man, they only serve doubles, right?
Good.
It's just
Jared,
doubles.
the other thing with that is I've actually seen people use that as a justification for, because I realize there's a resurgence of polygamy now, and people are saying, look, well, you don't have to settle anymore if person A has these 4 qualities you really like, and person B has these 3 qualities you really like that are different from person A, and then person C has these other 5 qualities you really like but they're different from A, B, then you can have all three.
Yeah, yeah,
And they don't talk about all what you're getting with that, right? The add-ons, the value adds, you know all the qualities you wouldn't like that each would have. And I mean, I remember even when I was working in the Mid East, and most of the guys, a lot of the guys were Muslims, but very few had more than one wife. And all of them would say, "Look, guy, one woman is enough to please and to keep happy. Why on earth would I try?" So although they're legally allowed to, they're like, "Nah, I'm so good, not even having it." Good night, Bishop.
Evening, evening, evening.
but it's summertime where I am, and my understanding is that you are also close by, like a stone's throw.
She came in there looking like Gandalf or something. I'm just waiting to see the rod come out and the "You shall not pass."
I prefer cold over hot any day.
No. You must be have it on what 55, the AC on 55 where you are?
72.
Oh, 72. Okay.
But I don't know. The first floor is always cooler than all the other floors, so that's
Gotcha.
interesting conversation I walked in here on. I guess the only thing that I have to offer is how do I know what I like if I don't try other things?
Hey. Hey. But then you still have to make a choice, right?
No problem, but I have to go through a variety of things in order to make a choice.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think that works for some people and it doesn't work for others. But
Tell me more.
me or Bishop?
No, you. They said it works for some people, but not others. Tell me more about what you mean.
So like maybe about what was it? Maybe in 2012, I used to be a diehard PC guy, and in 2012 I think I switched to Mac, and I've never looked back. Right? And people keep telling me, "Oh man, this new Dell XPS, this new, and you need to try this, and these Razer computers, and these." No, I'm good. I don't. I've found I stumbled upon something without much looking that meets all my needs, and I'm happy with it.
But you still tried something new. We started with Windows.
Yeah, well, right, but with Gateway, that's to tell you how long ago this was, right? And when I left Gateway, I went to Mac, and it's like people keep bringing all these new, and it's this and it's that and it's the other. I'm like, there are times when you find something, you settle into it, and you're like, you don't need to.
No, I see. I think where you arrived was contentment, right? Like I'm content with what I have, and so
Right.
therefore I don't need extra things.
Right.
However, I still believe that the opportunity to experience for some people can allow you to make better choices. For others, it could split the gamut and go where where we're talking about of like, oh, I want everything and nothing at the same time.
Yeah. But I guess it's more of a personal, what works for you kind of thing, right?
I think everyone wants at least one option.
Right. That becomes a great point for me to bring Cliff and Lorraine into the conversation. So we were having a conversation that is spilling out from our thoughts on a quote that Courtney got from a book that he's reading or was part of a conversation he was having with some friends of his that does have tie into some of the stuff we talking in the reading, but we working our way there. So I'm going to have Courtney read the quote and then allow you to kind of think about it and share your thoughts. I'll try to recap some of the things that were said, or at least what I said anyway, so that you guys can be in the same page. And then anybody else who's looking on can go like, oh, what are they talking about?
All right. So the book is called The Paradox of Choice. It's by Barry Schwartz. And the quote is, "The existence of multiple alternatives makes it easy for us to imagine alternatives that don't exist, alternatives that combine the features of the ones that do exist. And to the extent that we engage our imagination in this way, we will be even less satisfied with the alternative we end up choosing. So, once again, a greater variety of choices actually makes us feel worse."
Mm-hmm. I had co-signed that, and I started to talk about my experience with food and restaurants, and why I like buffets over single order restaurants where you pay one fee and then you could try everything versus you pay one fee and you're kind of stuck with what you get. Because where I come from, once you buy it, if you don't like it, you have to buy something else. You can't send it back, right? That whole American thing where you can send it back is different to me, right? I don't know about them thing. But once you buy this, you're stuck with it. And when it come out and it's smaller than you thought it was going to be, or it wasn't exactly all that it said in the thing, but then you see somebody else food walk by and you go, where was that on the menu, and how could I have had that? And if I'd had pictures, that's why I don't like Thai restaurants, because Thai restaurants don't have any pictures in the menu, right? Like when you go to IHOP, there are pictures on the menu, and there's something there that might entice you. Like, yeah, I like how that looking, I won't get that one, right? So I was co-signing that when there are too many choices, it becomes dissatisfying. And then I was also talking about leveraging the thought of the combination of choices. Now you wanna get this and that because this has stuff that don't have, and this has stuff that don't have, and so you put it together your perfect one by getting all three, right? Like, so I was trying to put together a Nike Air Presto, right? Initially, I wanted the green one. I put together this nice one. I was green. I was like, it'll be cool if I had a blue one. It'll probably be cool if I had a purple one, because that would go real good with that Jokic jersey, right? That will lash. I end up having to scale down, because the one I set out to buy was the green one. It was really nice, right? But I was like, I don't have anything green now. I have to go get something green to go with this. And sure, it would be nice, right? But I do have something blue. So let me get the blue one, and I'll get the purple one. And maybe later on I'll get the green one. So that all I went in to get one, and I ended up with three because I couldn't decide between them, right? And so I was saying all of that to say those are around Courtney's quote. And Jerry had some thoughts, and Sharika had some thoughts. I'm allowing him to kind of recap his thoughts, because I went a little bit left of mine original thoughts, but it was still in the same space. And then I'm allowed Cliff and Lorraine to chime in. Jerry, if you could catch them up to where you went with it.
I was just saying, in I co-signed that message as well, and I think in the particular context of like marriage and relationships, you like to think if you see more, you go to all these different countries, you see more males or females, whatever the case is. And I was saying, you've been there, done that, and then you realize, right? And I've drawn a reference to like when I was working in the Middle East, and most of the guys are Muslim, but they all have one wife, although legally they're allowed to have multiple ones. Their thing is like, look, met this lady, settled in, content. I don't need to go do this thing where, okay, this woman has these 3 traits I like, this woman has these 5 traits I like, this other woman has these 2 traits I like. And since they're all different traits, I'll just go have 3 wives, right? Because then you're also getting stuff you wouldn't like along with it. So, and they are probably more personal thing. There are people who can settle into something and be content without needing much in the way of options or choices. And then there are other people who, to Sharika's point, probably need exposure to choices to better appreciate what they have, or just be better able to make a better choice. Yeah.
You heard what Sharika said. Jerry kind of spoke on her behalf. So, Cliff, Maureen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That too many choices can be a bad thing. I've experienced that way too many times, and I think that I am now with the subscription of you can get with this or you can get with that. You can get with this or you can get with that. It's one or the other. The more you keep it simple, the better it is. I agree with Sharika also when you say, you should at least have one choice. You know what I mean? But in my experience of doing all different kinds of things, the more choices you have is great, but it becomes more complicated at the same time. I came in at one point where Jerry was talking about the Apple and the Mac. I was a diehard iPhone person until Android came out with the stylus, with the pen. And I was upset with Apple for not making enough strides. And I went on and bought the iPhone, not the iPhone, the Android.
The Note.
The Note, yeah. I bought the Note, And immediately I was overwhelmed because where I was restricted, to so to speak, in my iPhone world, Apple had so many choices that I was overwhelmed because it was you can do this, do this, do this, and it took me a while to adjust to it because there was just so many options that I could do. But then at the same time, you get to know both and realize that there are pros and cons to each. So that's it for me.
Lori?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, I agree. Too many choices makes it more difficult for me to make a choice. But I tend to stick with what I know. So what I know is usually my general compass. That's the direction I'm usually going in. And every now and then I'll try something, like for example with food, I'll try it out of somebody else's plate. And they'll be like, next time. Because I don't want to get it and then not like it, knowing I had to pay for it. Like I don't like that. So I usually like to, try, okay, let me try. Oh, that's okay, next time. I'm still eating the food that I love, but I know next time I could venture out a little bit because there's that option now that I know I like. And I am that person, which I feel like most restaurants are probably like, this girl. I'd be the one to say the combo comes with A, B, C, and I'm like, can I get A, take out B, add E, put F on the end? That's me. So I'm like, I want it how I want it because I know what I like. So I tend to just stick with what I know about myself.
But how do you know what you like if you don't experience it?
I mean, that's what I said. I try it when there's an option, an opportunity to try. And then I'm like, hey, let me do this.
Oh, here's the thing. I live life. Jared, you know about me. Don't knock it till you try it twice. The first time, you're a little nervous, right? Like I'm always, everything in life is that way for me, as far as your imagination can think. Anyway, that's the life I live. If I wonder if I were to sit and wait for someone to give me the opportunity to try, what type of person I would be. I always admire people that trust someone else that much to give them the opportunity to try versus just trying it myself. Like,
it depends on what you're talking about, though.
Huh?
It depends on what you're talking about.
No, I think in everything. Like, right. So, like, you mentioned food.
Mm-hmm.
Jared's palate is very different than mine, right? Jared loves the Indian food. I can't stand it. Right? Like,
what?
And so, but I say that to say, like, if I saw something on Jared's plate, right? Like that doesn't mean that Jared and I don't share great options on ice cream because we find a great liking there. But if I gotta look, I don't know. I think there's so much beauty in just doing it on your own. Because I feel like, and I was in therapy. I talked about this in therapy this week. I know what I don't like. And I only know what I don't like because I've experienced so many things. But to land on what I do like is a lot harder simply because
you're open to so many things.
I'm open to so many things, right? And so I can tell you what don't work.
No, we're doing that again. We tried it twice.
That again. However, I'm not opposed to trying that other thing over there, right? And I don't think it stops me. If I had to land, of course, I could land on things that make me content. Back to Jerome, like I can go to contentment. I know where I'm content, but the thrill of, for instance, y'all know I love to travel. I get on my dad every year. He go to the same spot every single year. I'm like, my man, it's the same, son. It's the same spot. Like you don't want to ever just want to. No.
I think
I admire that level of contentment, but it's wild to me.
That not going to always going to the same spot when it comes to traveling is that is crazy. But no offense to that. But I think a lot of it is contextual. So I remember a therapist saying there's some people who go by leading indicators and some go by lagging indicators, right? So some people it's they get really tunnel visioned in on, and this will sound on who they are and understanding who they are. They kind of know what makes them happy without experimenting. So I got really into who I am, and you can probably tell by the music notes and stuff on the wall. This is a guy who, although he manages a telecom company by day, he really loves music. And because I know that about myself, all the stuff involved in music is kind of like it's a given. I don't need to try, I don't need to experiment. I know I love music. And then there are other people who, to arrive at that, it's more about, okay, we'll try some music, we'll try painting, we'll try this, we'll try that. And I'm like, painting definitely not for me, basketball definitely not for me, music, okay, I got you. And it's not that either approach is right or wrong. It's just it's a different mechanism of coming to the same, or coming to a decision, coming to a resolution. Some leading indicators, some lag indicators.
I mean, I don't want anybody to feel like I'm saying, man, you're right, wrong. My way's right, your way is wrong. Definitely not where I'm going with it. I think God had, to your point, has created personalities of people where you can entertain multiple things and still land on something. And there are other people who cannot entertain multiple things because they will land on a Frankenstein, right? I want everything, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I can never be fully content. I do think, though, we need to invite those who are more wanderers into our fold, because I am a wanderer who wandered around, whether it be religion, relationship, whatever, to land on where I'm at. And I feel like it's because I wandered that I'm so 10 toes down on where I'm at, right? Like, okay, I know what it is that was out there. I'm good on this. This is what's closest to whatever I find. Again, let me wander. And I'm, in my experience, with most people who've never wandered, the fear of wandering has crippled them, and they don't really understand what's going on. They're very much into what they've experienced, but the fear of something uprooting what they think they have stops them from trying anything else. Right? Because, for instance, like, let's take the 2 wives thing, right? I'm just going to use the Indian guys you talk about. In most cases, it's the fear of experience what someone else showed you or something else you saw, right? To be like, cheese on bread. I'm breading over there. And these 2 women, they're driving him in. Right? Like, but you could go over to Senegal and see the happiest of family with 2 wives. And you'd be like, you know what?
Well, maybe I might consider it.
All right, and then you can go to China and see the woman with 2 husbands and be like, you know what? No, that is this piece. I don't even want one woman. I want to be a second husband. You know what I mean? Like, and so a lot of the fear is based on what we've seen in other people and that we've kind of taken in as our own. And saying, I don't want to experience that negativity. I don't want to experience what seems to be that headache. And so I'm content where I'm at without trying.
But just one thing on that quickly too, Sharika. It's funny going back to the fact that it's contextual, right? Because with the first example you raised, so like me, I went on a I don't want to call it a spiritual pilgrimage, right? I studied Islam, Catholicism. I mean, when I say study, I mean study. I was the whole 9, right? Doing the catechisms, you name it, Buddhism, Shintoism, you name it, and I came right back where I started essentially, right? And so to your point, I'm 10 toes, 10 fingers, everything deep in where I am now because I already know. So in some contexts, I'm wondering and becoming more rooted and grounded in something, and in others, I'm just like, no, I'm good with Apple. I don't need anything else. So sometimes it's like, it's a dynamic thing, right? It's a fluid thing.
So how do you take those ideas and meld them with trusting God? And particularly since we started talking about wandering and having the need to experience, and we were talking in general, but I am now trying to, marry those ideas. And I asked that because if I think about this conversation in the context of Eve had this limited amount of information. It was death. It was death or life. It wasn't slow death or potential life in evil. It wasn't all of those options. And when she got the additional option, she naturally wanted to explore it because she don't know any better. And I'm sure post the option, she was 10 toes deep in, I will trust God, right? Kind of like what Solomon it says in Ecclesiastes. Yeah, I try all of that. So all there is right now is to trust God. What is the impact to faith, or is there an impact to faith, or is there a statement about faith there, or can that be applied, or what would God be expecting from us? How does that work in the context of Him?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lorraine.
No, I mean, just a simple statement. So I was listening to an Audible Bible, and the Bible verse where he was talking about the parable where he said one said he'll go and didn't go, and one said no, did whatever they want to do, and then came back and did what God said. And he was like, which one was better? I was like, well, the one who ended up doing what I said. So I feel like it's, as long as you land where you're, you know what I mean? Like you end up doing the thing that he said. To say you're going to do it and be like, okay, I'm tunnel vision, it's me, God, and then to be all over the place, I feel like is the direction you don't want to go. But to be, I feel like I'm more open to wondering and exploring in certain areas than I am in others. So food-wise, I eat when I'm hungry. So I'm not playing with my food. So because I'm not gonna order it and it be not what I want and I just pay for it unless I'm willing to pay for two items, like and sometimes I do that. I'll buy what I normally like and then I'll buy the other thing. I'm like, well, I could pack this up and eat this one later, and because this one was good. And I mean, in other areas, I might be willing to try certain things, but there's some things that just not as open. And it may be like a hidden fear, like Sharika was saying, that I may not even be aware of, like a comfort in just going straight, not looking left or right, just this is where I'm going because I don't know what's out there. I can step out and look out and be like, oh, wait, where's the road? Wait, how did I get over there? So, I mean, I understand it, but
okay.
I always laugh because if I don't like something at the restaurant, hey, I don't like it. Send it back. I don't care. Like,
maybe
you gotta pay for it.
Yeah, but maybe that's the answer, though.
That's my problem.
Maybe
no, I don't.
Sorry.
No, she said I gotta pay for it. I'm like, if I don't like it, waiter is
no, Lorraine, in this here America,
I don't like it.
You don't like it, you send it back. And they say, oh, you don't like it? Oh, would you like to get something else? We're not going to charge you for that.
No, I don't hear that.
I was like, wait, we do that?
Apparently, right?
I don't want it. Oh, for real? Yeah, all right.
Jared, try that here, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
But maybe guys, that's the answer. Maybe it's that it's really about balance. So maybe some people are like 70% wonder, 30%. Some people are like 30% content, or whatever you want to call it, and then some people are 70% content, some are 30% wanderer, because there'll always be areas in almost anybody's life where they'll wander, and then there are other things that they're just not messing with.
So if I'm wondering, am I distrusting God?
But again, I guess it depends on the context, right? If you're wondering with food, I don't think you're distrusting God. If you're wondering with God says specifically, don't do this, or go work at this place, go start this business, and you go trying other things, you're asking for trouble. I think the problem comes, everybody's going to be more or less one thing or the other, and the problem comes with if you go, my humble opinion, all to one extreme. So if you're only wondering, or you're only like, it's this and nothing else, and you can't even question, and you can't even, because you see people like that all the time, and then they can't even, in a religious context, they can't even defend the faith that they have because they won't even entertain any questions. Or I remember my dad giving us this book to read, Answers to Objections. It's like, I probably have it somewhere in the back there. It's like this thick. Okay, maybe that thick. And it's like literally almost every objection that has ever been raised to Adventism, and what the biblical responses, what some of the biblical responses are.
Somebody put that book together. That was a doctorate study.
Yeah. And I'll go see if I find it before we wrap up. But it's like if you get to this point where you don't even want to, as like Sharika was saying, where you wouldn't even try, you wouldn't even question, you wouldn't even decide on anything at all. It doesn't even have to be on something earth shattering, but you won't even. There are people I know who will never even try to drive or never. It's like that's just crazy.
So does it matter the level of wondering? So there's wondering in thought and there's wondering in practice. So there's just thinking about it, and then there's actually going out there and doing.
I'm
Well,
the wrong person to ask.
No, I'm just asking. I'm just asking. 'cause
I'm
you're
gonna
saying
do
about
it, and I'm gonna do it well, and I'm gonna be sober, right? Because I want to know if I like
She would
it.
write a book, memoirs, do a
Uh,
how
No, I'm
to.
saying regarding the faith thing he's talking about, is it pertaining to both thought and practice, or are we referring to like just?
So here's the thing, Lorraine. I don't think God wants me to serve Him because of fear,
Right.
right? Like,
Mhm.
and I think in so many ways, some of us have become, include myself, because I catch myself at least once a week, transactional. In that, boy, if I do this and I did, I'm going to hell. All right, let's not do that. That's just not. We're not doing it, right? But then I also remember where sticking to the rules didn't really work out for the rich young ruler. It was just one of those, I don't even know you, homie. Like, I don't care how many rules you did. And so I think in so many ways, God is looking for people that are going to hold down the fort, right? Like, it reminds me of when I was younger. We could all talk about showing up for the fight, but if you don't show up for the fight, I don't care what you said all this time, right? And so, in the spiritual aspect, I can think about XYZ. I can think about, well, maybe I wonder if XYZ. And I think we're all aware of when the thought is a pure wandering versus just a straight, just just I'm over it. I think he honors my opportunity to experiment from a inquisitive perspective, not a rebellious perspective.
Sorry.
What
I had to
about
bring this in.
CG, I'm with you. Like, let's go.
what?
It says,
What if it's something where it's more like that commitment is based on like not just that one choice, it's multiple choices. Like for instance, this commitment to God. I'll use this example. It's not like God laying down a $1,000 bill on the table and you're saying this is my life. I give it to you. It's like you go to the bank and it's $1,000 in quarters, and each choice you make, you get 25 here, 50 here, but it's all about, I think, the accumulation ultimately, where you can see that way you can kind of see, all right, where am I actually headed? Because I feel like there's consequences ultimately, which I mean, Solomon says that ultimately when he comes to the conclusion of everything, there are ultimately consequences to all these choices. He said, yo, God is going to judge us based on how we've sat down, what we've invested in, I should say. You know what I mean? So
let's do this, Courtney. Now that you brought that up and introduced that, this ties in, it's not coincidentally, ironically, it ties in. It just ties in. Whatever
hey, man, Spirit is leading. It's going.
To one of the things I was wrestling with this week, from 1 Kings 14. I didn't intend to tie it in here, but it's naturally fitting, right? So, 1 Kings 14, from verse 7 through 11. Courtney, will you be our designated reader?
As always, I don't even know why he hesitated. Just go forward. No choices here.
I'm going as the computer will let me.
He said that was a hesitation.
Jerry, would you say 1 Kings what?
14.
1 Kings 14,
11?
7 to 11.
Okay.
7 to 11. 7:11. Okay. Give your husband Jeroboam this message from the Lord, the God of Israel. I promoted you from the ranks of the common people and made you ruler over my people Israel. I ripped the kingdom away from the family of David and gave it to you. But you have not been like my servant David, who obeyed my commands and followed me with all his heart and always did whatever I wanted. You have done more evil than all who have lived before you. You have made other gods to yourself and have made me furious with your gold calves. And since you have turned your back on me, I will bring disaster on your dynasty and will destroy every one of your male descendants, slave and free alike, anywhere in Israel. I will burn up your royal dynasty as one burns up trash until it is all gone. I was 11. The members of Jeroboam's family who die in the city will be eaten by dogs, and those who die in the field will be eaten by vultures. I, the Lord, have spoken.
How does that? Do you see any connections between that and what we've been talking about? And if so, what? And I guess after that, I'll kind of share what I've been wrestling with in the context of what we were talking about. But do you see any connections? Does it?
Well, let me just jump in here because we're talking about Solomon, and we know towards the end of Ecclesiastes, he says what? Ecclesiastes 12, 13 through 14. He said, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So that's what Solomon said after, like you said, he tried it all. He done everything. And that's what his conclusion, a part of his conclusion.
The Wanderer.
Right. He said he left no stone unturned.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at God's characterization of David in contrast to Jeroboam, right? David was a servant who did everything he wanted all the time. That's not technically the case. So
that's not what God said. God said he did everything with the exception of that thing with with Bathsheba.
Well, he did a little bit more than that according to the scripture, but according to God's words here.
Oh, okay.
You have not been like my servant David, who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that is technically not true. So we were talking about, the extent of wandering and when it becomes problematic and when it doesn't. And, so I'm now, what makes David wanderings be categorized as followed with his whole heart, but Jeroboam as being the chief of sinners, so to speak?
Yeah.
Did he take other people with him? Like, did he allow them to wander as well? Did he pull other wanderers? Like, is that what Jeroboam I'm referring to? Like,
well, that I guess is a part of what he did. Did David take other people? I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah. Sharika?
One thing that came to mind was that God gives you freedom of choice in your life. But if I hand you something that's mine, I expect you to follow what I ask you to do with it. And in here, it felt like God was talking about the kingdoms. I gave you my people. I asked you to lead them a certain path. I'm going to need you to stick to that. You want to screw up your own life? Do your own thing over there, my minx. As far as my people, you took my... It's like I gave you a job. If you didn't like that job, we should step down. But you've now made a mockery of my job. It kind of felt like, when you were young and your parents, they don't make a mockery of my last name. Like, don't do that. Right. And I think David, while David didn't do everything the Lord wanted in his life, when it came to that kingdom, he took it a little different. Like he took a different approach to when he was handling things that he knew specifically were not mine. And and I was given those things and given a task.
So he wandered in certain areas and not another.
I just think there's a different. So I've always, the verse that comes to mind is consider the cost, right? Consider what you're signing up for. When you decided to be, whether I chose you as king or not, when you take on that, you knew what you were signing up for. And so I have a certain expectation. And so in that expectation, I don't expect for you to wander. It's very clear what I want from you. In your regular life, yeah, you should consider the cost and you can waver on a couple things. But when you in my position represent me, I'm gonna need you to stick to the plan. Because if you don't stick to the plan and you mess up everybody else's plan, then I gotta mess you up. Now I gotta start over. Right? Like, and which is what he's like, I gotta wipe out all the men so that I can kill this bad thing, whatever disease, mental disease that you've spread. I gotta wipe all of these people out simply because you didn't take my job and do what I asked you to do with it.
So for those of us who don't have kingdoms, we have our lives, we represent him, we take on his name. How does that apply to us?
I love it. I love that question. That was one I was this.
I agree. I'm here for that. I think, however, so this is unpopular opinion, folks. I'm going to say that right now. Unpopular opinion.
Disclaimer.
Unpopular opinion. There's a song that said, "Drink water, I mind my business." There are certain things that ain't got nothing to do with me. Don't watch me. I'm not good for TV. However, I do believe that me living my everyday life and being a child of God is very different than me being called to a level of ministry and telling God that I'm going to hold his people responsible. So if I am stewardship leader, and I'm only using that because that's where I was before, and I'm a bad example of stewardship, we have a problem. I could be a bad example of stewardship in my life, and I'm just experimenting. It's fine. But when I decide to take on a leadership role and try to lead God's people somewhere, whether it's one way or another way, it's a whole different argument. I even think with children, right? Like if you're going to lead children to church and you're going to choose to expose them to that, you should be really cautious of what you're doing in your household because you're exposing them to what they think is church and it's coming through you. But that's just me though, right? Like, because I don't necessarily think that everybody I see, like if I see, I'm gonna use you, Jerome. If I see Jerome on the street, whispering in somebody's ear, I'm not going to say Jerome doing foolishness. I don't know what he's doing. Like that's between Jerome and whoever he whispering to. That ain't gonna have to do with me. What I can do is say, yo, Jerome, you know something? This see up on the street. And if he want to be like, word, where? And if he want to get out of me where I saw him, sure, go right ahead. Then we can have that conversation. But I can't make assumptions, right? I don't know what was there. But if Jerome was now going to go on the pulpit the next day and say, yo, you shouldn't roam street after 12 o'clock. Hold on, Jerome, I was outside. You was outside. What are you telling the people, right? Like, I don't know if the demonstration of
telling them, like Solomon, I was all there.
There's a difference between, and so I think that's a key, right? There's a difference between saying I was out there versus don't go out there. I'm never out there. There ain't nothing to see out there.
I'm never out there anymore.
No, I saw you yesterday.
No, but Sherika, to your point, I think that's one of the problems with our witness now, where a lot of us lack authenticity. We're afraid to be authentic. We did our our crazy stuff.
We're
and
doing
then for our kids or for the younger generation, we behave like and I think sometimes it's more effective when you can tell them, like Solomon, look, I've been there, done that, doesn't work. As opposed to, you try to take this role as if you don't know, as if you didn't try, as if you didn't understand that you're free to choose, but you're not free from consequences.
I would even ground it more. I still doing it. I'm addicted to it. I don't think you should start. It's not easy to break.
Yeah, like the drug dealers who just tell the sports stars, not you.
I'm not giving you this. Like, I'm not giving you this. It's not for you.
Correct.
And I think those people are a bigger witness than the people that telling me, yo, don't do it, but you doing it back there.
Yeah. Because it's about being, like I said, authentic, being transparent too, right?
Rahab was a right. She wasn't telling you she was in the church. Listen here, this is my job. I'm gonna tell y'all what my job is. I'm gonna tell y'all what I be at.
Yeah.
But I also know that I want to help you because y'all are good people, right? Like there's that level of authenticity. That doesn't mean that it gives her the right to stay where she's at.
Correct.
But knowing where people at can really help you decide whether or not they're worth following.
So can you? So is it a bit? Depending on the person, is it a cop out to say, well, I'm not in that position, so I can do what I want to do?
Good question.
So when you say like,
so like there are people that was like, it's almost like they hold other people in certain positions because we know the greater your role is, the higher the responsibility given. I think we all agree on that. But I feel like sometimes, because we're not in a certain position, we feel like it's okay for us to do certain things because we're like, well, I'm not up there, I'm not representing this, but it's like, but we are.
But it depends on whose consequences you fear.
Well, let me see. I mean, all right, I want to share this little writing real quick. And it has to do with this. It's saying, as with Solomon, so with Rehoboam, the influence of wrong example led many astray. And as with them, so to a greater or less degree is it today with everyone who gives himself up to work evil. The influence of wrongdoing is not confined to the doer. No man liveth unto himself, none perish alone in their iniquity. Every life is a light that brightens and cheers the pathway of others, or a dark and desolating influence that tends toward despair and ruin. We lead others either upward to happiness and immortal life, or downward to sorrow and eternal death. And if by our deeds we strengthen or force into activity the evil powers of those around us, we share in their sin.
So, Courtney, I hear that, and I do agree that there is a factor of influence that needs to be considered. But taking us back to kind of where we started, because while I agree with that, where Lorraine is kind of where I'm trending, or I feel like I'm trending if I'm understanding where she is correctly anyway. In terms of me and God and his expectations of me, regardless of what assignment he's given me, I believe that there might be something that's true in this assignment and outside of this assignment in terms of what his expectations are, and the wandering versus the not wandering thing. And I want to throw something out there from 1 Kings 12 and ask if that may answer the bell a little bit. So 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 19 to 20.
So, Jared, before you go there, I wanted to just finish that thought of it depends on whose consequences you fear.
Okay.
And I say that because, Lorraine, to your point, we're examples of everybody or for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it goes back into your idea of am I not doing these things because I'm afraid of man's judgment? Am I not doing these things because I'm afraid of God's judgment? Where does my fear lie? Whose consequences am I afraid of? And I think it's in that, for me, that I'm a witness of sort. Because the fear that's driving me is important.
It is, and then sometimes if it's a fear of God, then that's when you tend to be your most authentic self. What you do in private is what you do in public, and vice versa. But if it's a fear of man, as long as you think you can get away with it, nobody's seeing, nobody's watching, then it's like open season, man.
Courtney, 1 Kings 12, 19 and 20.
And to this day, the northern tribes of Israel have refused to be ruled by a descendant of David. When the people of Israel learned of Jeroboam's return from Egypt they called an assembly and made him king over all Israel. So only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the family of David.
How much of it is the acceptance of the authority of God and the influence of that in the choices that I'm making versus the establishment of my own autonomy or something else in his place? And I ask that because that's this, refusing to be ruled by. David was not ruled by anything else but God, no matter what he did. And even how matter he went astray and wandered and he did his own thing, he always remained in a posture of you the boss. Right? Jeroboam, on the other hand, and Saul and many others was like, well, yes to what Sharika said, they didn't handle the responsibility correctly. Yes, what Sharika said, they also led people astray. But the main difference from David, because David, he did the census, yeah, and that led people astray in terms of his influence. He did Bathsheba, and that led people astray. I mean, he was killing people for fun. I don't know that anybody didn't know that was happening, and so
They were very bad people, very, very bad.
no, he was robbing and killing people. It wasn't necessarily bad people. He was robbing people and killing people for fun. That's what how he was spending his time making a living. He was a bandit. He was a mercenary and a bandit. For real, for real. And he was a notorious bandit. We used to move with a notorious circle of 30 men who was infamous how bad they were, right? They tell stories about, hey, at thirsty, men going in the fort, kill people, get water, and come back. That is bad man thing, right? All that for just a drink of water. Yeah. Anyway. But it feels like that whole refusing to be ruled by feels like it's the delineating factor that rises up above all these others, which are true and do factor in to some degree or the other. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
You said a lot, man. You said you want to get the thoughts on that.
You want the thoughts on what you said about David?
Well, I said about David in the context of what we're talking about there. In terms of
what spoke to me was unpopular opinion. Being a child of God or being a servant of God doesn't mean that I always do the right thing. And again, that's between me and God. Because regardless of what we see happen with David, and this is not giving David an excuse, God never failed to be like, but that's my dude. And David always like, but that's my dude. All right, I'm killing, I'm robbing, I'm stealing, I'm taking people's wife, I'm killing people because I don't want them to deal with the babies or whatever. But that's my dude, right? Like, let's not get it twisted.
And I never rising up against him to take his spot or to challenge his authority. It's almost like a bad child versus a rebellious child, right?
It reminds me of DMX. Woo.
Yeah, like that.
DMX was a man of God. We're not arguing that. But DMX was always finding himself in some stuff. He was always finding himself.
Yep.
But what everybody would say when DMX prayed for you, or when he talked, like, it was just like, yo, God is with that man. It's just he finding himself in some stuff. And it didn't sit well with people that DMX was like, that's my dude.
It didn't sit well with church people. Some church people.
Well, Jerome, I can't help you there.
Yeah. No, but it's true because I remember there was was it TBN or some one of those religious stations he was on, and he did like a closing prayer for people, and you know there are people who to this day, even at his funeral, talking about how life changing and just his praying for them, and you know how he let the Spirit use him, led them to Christ, and da 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 da. But you know, church people are like, but in his early songs, he talked about killing and robbing and raping, and yeah.
It was Brenda.
I mean, in fairness, I guess it's always when people look at you, right? Because I mean, if before the end of Solomon's story, you had some church people looking at his story when he is wilding out, they would be like, "But he's wilding out, though." Then he comes back and he says, "Here's the conclusion: fear God, keep His commandments. That's your job."
Like God's because this is not the first place I've seen God describe David this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God described him as my servant who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes. And it's clearly that his actions, that is not true. So what is God saying? And what I can point out is David never rejected the authority of God over him and always sat in that posture of, yeah, you the boss, yeah, you right, my bad, whatever you want.
I mean, Psalm shows you David continually coming back to God. Like, Lord, this is what's going on. Like, protect me. Like, save me from these wicked people. Like, Lord, sorry, I did, whatever. Like, he's constantly, that relationship we always talk about, he is in constant, nonstop, die hard. Like, it's me and you, God. Like, regardless of the poor, stupid stuff I do, like, forgive me. Like, like, I'm not going nowhere. Period.
Paul is saying absolutely he knew his place.
Mm-hmm.
And Gerald was saying, I put this up earlier, but I wanted to read it out, where God say, I rock with David, even though he wandered away and did that thing to Uriah. Okay, let's look at that. 1 Kings 15:5. For David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite.
Yes.
Well, see, that's not God saying that. That is the writer of Kings saying that. In 14, we have the writer of Kings quoting God, right? God says something quite similar, but he almost like says, he was my faithful servant, did everything I wanted. But he didn't really do everything he wanted, unless doing what he wanted was staying in a posture of, how did I put it? Continuing to recognize and accept the established authority.
I agree. I mean, look at the next verse comparing Jeroboam, right? He has the same issue, but he's saying, yo, you have made other gods for yourself and had made me furious with your gold calves. So now, like you said, they're now looking to these idols, and which are modeled after themselves, or so they choose, they're looking at themselves as the authority, and this is what makes God furious in this regard.
So if I'm wandering with God as an authority, is all right?
No, we're not saying it is all right.
Son dog don't have the same look.
is that what we're saying?
No.
Is that the acceptable wandering?
No.
Where I don't reject his authority?
No.
What are we saying then?
We're saying pussy and dog don't have the same look. That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. On some serious stuff, I feel like the one thing that it's saying to me is that it's an individual journey. If you watching this one or you watching that one, watching them does not does not show you what I want from you. Right? Like, we don't know what was going through David's head when he did what he was doing half his time. So when we're on the outside looking in and be like, oh, well, David was allowed to wander, I should wander. David was allowed to kill, I should kill. Like, you don't really know the conversations, the in-depth conversation in his mind with him and his God.
True, because the man of God from Judah, he went and eat, and he was eaten by a lion for eating. So,
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times
still bothers me.
I think we pass the accountability. I did it because X, or I did it because Y. And it's like, no, that's not what's being said. It's, for me, it's a marvel, one that I've accepted, that we may never know, that this relationship was precious. And if anything, regardless of the outcomes, I should be more concerned with the connection. There was something about that connection, and the way it played out is irrelevant. That connection, so that it's possible for God to hold you in high regard.
that's what I'm trying to figure out. What was it about that connection?
The relationship.
I think it's like if I were to look at Dee and Cliff and be like, what is it about that connection? I don't know. It's the time they spent with each other, right? Like, it's the bond. It's the investment. Maybe that's what it is. It's the investment. Like, David was always invested, at least in my opinion, in God. And God was always invested in David, regardless of what kind of, tussle they would go through. There was a level of investment. And maybe that's what kept them going.
He was working things out with fear and trembling. In our wondering, in our free will state, God is allowing some things in trying to figure out a relationship that works for both of us, that ultimately keeps you in a posture that David was in, that was reverence. So while he was out doing things, he was still figuring stuff out, and God was like, all right, you didn't go too far, but this is what you did. And he was like, all right, you're right, God, I won't do that again. But when he crossed the line, God was like, all right, you're going to have to pay for that, right? Your son gonna have to die, right? Your house is gonna be in turmoil for the rest of your life. Nobody's gonna say. When he crossed the line, God was like, yo, you went too far. Like, our relationship, we have an understanding. Just like when we were reading this week, when Christ was like, yo, Peter, come rock with me for a second. Come, let me talk to you. And John tagging behind, and Peter like, yo, is he good? God's like, why are you worried about him? If I tell him if I say he live forever, then what is that to you? Our relationship is our relationship. There are certain foundational things that we all follow, but it's still my relationship with God, because I'm working things out how he sees fit for me to reach the same place that he needs me to work in. So he may allow some things in my life that he won't allow in yours, but he's definitely still not going to let me cross the line, not without consequences, because my consequences, my actions have consequences. You mess with women and children. I mean, you mess with widows and children, boy. You see how quick things change for you. You know what I'm saying? Because there's certain lines that he's drawn. Like, okay, I understand that you're trying to figure this thing out. You're trying to figure us out, but you go too far. Nah, that's you.
So, like a father deals with all his children differently, and some looking at him and say, "Oh, Daddy, let you get away with that," and he pulled me up. Well, because you're different than this child, and I had to deal with this one differently. You're kind of talking in that regard?
Yes.
Okay. However, for all the children, they need to respect your house and how you do things in this house. You probably can anticipate that they will make mistakes, and they'll probably get spankings and get their stuff taken away from them and get put on punishment and be grounded and whatever other consequences may come. They ain't get good grades, and then they had to deal with that. But as long as they stay respectful and acknowledgement of, this is my house, I am the daddy and you are the child. Once they start to raise up to where they don't respect and acknowledge you as the daddy, they kind of have to go.
I think also, I think it's also when, as long as you don't compare yourself to your siblings too. Right? Because you could find yourself in a jealous state, or you could find yourself in a arrogant state, because of you saying in comparison to Cliff or in comparison to Courtney, I get better or I get worse. And it's like, as long as you accept that I love all of you in the way that you best receive love, and I provide consequence in the way that you best receive lessons, then we should be good. Like,
so I thought I had was I feel like you protect the relationships that are valuable to you. So when you're in a relationship, whatever relationship, if it is important to you, there's certain lines that you will not cross because that thing, okay, speak for Lorraine.
All right, I was gonna say
certain lines you won't cross. Almost like they're core things about you, like these are things that I will not. Never say never, but there's certain core things about you that generally steer majority of the stuff that you do. So I feel like in a relationship, with at least my relationship with God, there's certain things I'm not allowing to penetrate this relationship. So I might make mistakes, I might do certain things, but I know I value this thing. This thing is very important to me. It's important to me above all else. All other people, all other things that may try to come in to break this thing up, right? Now, me in this thing, between me and God, I'm like, I make my mistakes in this thing that's important. I don't always do the right thing, but I'm in this thing and I'm not leaving this thing. This thing is important to me.
So Lorraine, how do I know the boundaries of when I break it?
The relationship, like in the relationship, you learn this.
No,
Go ahead.
Until I reach a boundary, do I know your boundary? So, because you're saying like I don't endanger relationships I care about. Nah, that's not true. I think I try whatever, and I see what your boundaries are. But it's not until I try will I know what your real boundaries are.
Well, that's assuming that the person isn't even communicating with you and saying X, Y, and Z. Because if I
was going to say that, because outside of the communication and knowing, either I'm going to try or I'm imposing my own boundaries on you and hoping that those are the same ones.
Or and this may not be a popular opinion, but especially if it could be friendships or even in a relationship, people get, how do I say this, boy? You get to know and understand the persons in your circle just by observation, just by interacting. So it's like, if you hang out with me, even if I don't explicitly tell you in a conversation or every conversation, you need to be transparent, you need to be honest, you need to be whatever. You would realize that's just how I roll. And that's how everybody who I keep in my circle rolls. So if you're in my circle, you know, okay, that's how this is done. That's the culture. That's like, you can join a company and without certain things being said, you realize pretty quick, okay, very conservative culture, very corrupt culture, very whatever.
I agree, and I will co-sign that, as you said, Jerry, in a context.
Mm-hmm.
But let's look at a child of any age and a parent. Would you say that the child doesn't value the relationship when the child is disobedient?
No, I'm talking about me as an adult. I'm not talking about me as a child.
Yes, you as an adult, but you no matter how old you get beyond 100, you're still almost like a child to God, right?
Right.
So he will always be a father figure to you, and you'll always be in a childlike state in relation to him. So,
but in that context, I want to say yes, you are. And maybe it was a couple of weeks ago where you said the whole thing of our relationship with Christ is getting to the point where you value that relationship more than anything else. Because the reason you're being disobedient is because you don't value it enough. And you're like, I value this guy, but I kind of want to do what I want to do more. And when you're willing to say, you know what, I really, 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 really want to do this, but I value you more, so I won't do it. That's the point he's trying to get you to. Because everything happens at the expense of something else, right?
Right. But how long before a child gets to that place with a parent?
I don't know. It could be.
How long will it take you to get to that place with your parents?
I was different, like Sharika.
It depends on which parent. With my mom, there was a lot of. It took longer. With my dad, it was like, yeah, I'd kill you and make 12 more that look just like you. So yeah.
Yeah, but even in that, was it because you valued your relationship with him, or you just knew that if you didn't
I
keep
value my life, so
exactly? So it's
I'm
still a
completely
child.
attached
Like
to my
I don't
life
want
at
to
that
get
point.
spanked, and I don't want to get a punishment. It's not about daddy and how much I.
I get you. I get you.
But what about the kids that will do it because they know that they're loved and they know that so it's like, hey, I might get a spanking or whatever, but they ain't gonna kill me,
So listen, you said that my 5-year-old up to this week, there's something I can't remember what it was. Maybe she was jumping on the couch or something, and I told her, Madison, you can't do that. Are you looking to get yourself some licks? And she's like, well, daddy, you always say that you won't even beat me. And if you do, you know what? It wouldn't even hurt. So it's like, oh, okay. So therefore, I'll just keep.
Ouch. Shots
Ouch. Yeah.
So that's that entitlement factor.
fired.
And that's what knowledge of the person, right? I know where the boundaries are. That's what Costa Rica talking about.
I know where it's at. I've
I
tested
spent time
it
enough. I
before.
spent enough time with him to know that.
Right.
Do nothing.
I've
Yeah.
tested it before. I know he ain't gonna hit me. So therefore it is what it. But that doesn't mean that I didn't value the relationship the first time I tested it. I needed to establish the boundary. Like,
Was this a hard boundary or was this a soft boundary?
right, like
So how many people that tested the boundary didn't make it? Like the one time?
so here's the thing though, is it all depends on the recipient of the test. Right? Like, I think there's certain time where when somebody is just trying to get away with something. Someone was innocently trying to figure out if this is okay or not. One, for instance, a new friend of mine, perfect example. I hate when people don't show up on time. When you don't tell me you're going to be late. Because in my head, you knew you were going to be late before you were late. You should at least send me a text message or something, right? Especially West Indians and Africans. I'm calling y'all out. I think I got nothing else to do with my time, right? So I had an event, and I was like, all right, bet 2:00 things start. I told everybody, please get to my house by 1:00 because I'm starting at 2, which means I want you settled, ready to start at 2. One of my good friends, we're new friends, not even a year yet, and she came at 2:00, 2:01. I called her, yeah, where you at? It's 2:00, and she's like, I'm running late. At what point were you going to say that? And she started laughing, and she's like, are you about to eat my head off right now? Right now? And exactly when you get here too, and maybe even tomorrow. And she was like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. So when you come and I have attitude, don't say nothing to me. Right? Like, and that was that.
But you can still come.
You can still come, but you got to learn that this is the situation. Right, and then the next day, we had a conversation. I said to her, I feel like it's the biggest disrespect to assume that being late is acceptable for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and I know that I'm West Indian, and a lot of times people tell you party start 3:00 and it really start 4:30, 5:00. You wouldn't know that I'm true to my 2 until 2:01 came, right? Like, and so we had to have that conversation. Right. Did I just cut her off? No, you can still come.
Right.
But don't do this again. Right. And so I say that to say, but if it were somebody, another close friend of mine who know I don't do 2:00, I don't do 2:01. I might have to embarrass you right then and there, because that's just what it is. So if you don't push the boundary, you don't know what the boundary is.
Mm-hmm.
There's
I got
a conversation out this weekend. Somebody said, to your point about the recipient, Sharika, they said even when it comes to love has to do more with who's receiving it than who's giving it. And the example he raised, he's like, look, God loves perfectly, right? So he drew a nice parallel. He's like, is anything possible for God? Can God do anything? And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, but will God ever force your will? I'm like, no. He's like, okay, so God is actually chained by your choice, by your will. I'm like, yeah, I follow. And then he's like, well, what does the Bible say? Who or what does the Bible say God is? And it's like, God is love. He's like, right. So which means love, as perfect and wholesome and nurturing and whatever as it can be, is chained by the will or the choices of who's receiving it. Mm-hmm. So you can be, and the person receiving it usually is going to try the boundaries, test the boundaries. And if they realize, wait a minute, I can get away with this, and this, guess what? They'll just keep. And he said, that's essentially why people end up, not everybody's going to be saved, because some people will test the boundary and become entitled and figure they'll keep testing.
Mhm.
And then the people though who test the boundary, and on the very first test they get kicked out, right?
Right.
Because if you look at like David or Solomon, they were at it, and it's like,
I don't know
and then you
anybody.
look at what was his name? It's Uzzah?
I don't know anybody who
Touch the ark.
who test the
Yeah.
boundary
Was
at
it
the very
Uzzah or
first time. I
was
don't.
his-
I I'd like a others. I don't even know others a good example because I don't know anything about others like before the arc, right? So I don't know if that is his first boundary test or not. I don't have that.
Right.
Most of the major Bible characters, even Saul, he wasn't kicked out on the first boundary test. He, and I'm saying this because the Bible is about God and not about the individuals. And there's a
Right.
pattern with God where even with Cain, when Cain came, he's like, yo, if you do right, you do right. And then even when he, even when he was cursed or whatever, God still was in a different kind of space with him. And the the interactions that you see with God in the Bible and the nature of relationships that he has, he's not a one strike type of person. But there are some firm boundaries that he establishes and he makes very clear. So I'll put it this way. One of the things that is coming out of the conversation based on what we've been saying is David may have tested the boundaries, but he never crossed over them.
Did you just say David never crossed the boundary?
Let me put it this way. He did not,
Uh,
even if he crossed over the boundary, he once he tested the boundary and established where the boundary was, he stayed within the boundary.
Right, that's what you meant.
That's what I meant by not crossing it. He tested it, so you had to cross it to test it. But
and then you come back.
That's where it was. He stayed within it.
There was never two Bathshebas.
Right.
So, quick question. So, whoever wants to answer this, can you give me a personal example of you testing a boundary and you learning that God says don't test that boundary?
Say that again, Lauren.
So we're saying earlier when I said about protecting a relationship, you're like, well, how do you know the boundaries without, So I'm asking you in your personal life, example where you tested a boundary and you learned that that was a line not to cross, without because my personal way of knowing a boundary is what I've learned about God in the Bible. So there's certain lines for me that I try my absolute best not to cross. So I'm asking in a relationship, because you're saying within your relationship you learn what the lines are. So give me an example of in your personal life where you tried a boundary and then you learned, hey, no, this is. Go ahead.
Two came to mind.
Okay.
One, I finally, I was on Water for Thirsty. I said it out loud that God sits high and looks low and has nothing to do with my everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And I stuck by that. And I was like, all right, God, that's how I truly feel. So it is what it is. And I swear to you, I got my beat by God himself. And I say that to say, because that was when I had my break-in and the silent and the angel showed up and all that happened. It was after I uttered those words. He's like, all right, let me show you how this works. And I'm going to show you that I'm here. That was a huge one for me, where I was just like, golly. Okay, so that's not true. I'm not going to do that again. That's a boundary I'm not going to cross. It's not that he sits high, looks low. It's he allows certain things to happen, and that's his business where he wants to come in and play.
Mhm.
That was a big one for me.
Right.
Another one that I feel like is when I used to think that I believe in coincidence. I was like, coincidence happens, right? It's all about probability and the laws of science.
Mm.
And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I tried that with God. Like, it's just a coincidence. He had nothing to do with that. And I got shot down with that again. It was a clear shot down. It was like, okay, hand of the extraterrestrial, as you would put it, comes in and kills it. I've only experienced it with big things. Like when I start making statements that could be detrimental to somebody else's experience. Because I don't think God cared. Because I had the thought for a while in my head, at least the one that he sits high and looks low. It wasn't until I uttered it on Water for the Thirsty. I think it was Jared that pushed it out of me. That all of a sudden things went awry. So going back to that, we can battle this, but the minute you start to influence other people on this, and this don't. Oh, you really believe that, huh? Got you. You acted on it. So that's a personal experience for me. That's the count.
Yeah, one of mine is so I felt commissioned to be involved in a ministry experience, and the orientation that God gave me around it is that the ministry is to the people who participate in, and the people who are recipient is an inadvertent ministry to them. Right? We serve in this ministry in the same group to minister to others, but really you're here to grow deeper here. And we got this opportunity to refine the ministry such that we put a different level of, I would say, excellence and professionalism to it. We started Xing out some of these weaker links, and I'd say, and he shut the whole thing down. He shut the whole thing down. I was like, okay, yeah. Once we shifted gears from, there were all kind of things that was happening that maybe wasn't acceptable. But once we shifted gears and we did the Samson move, don't cut your hair, and we shifted gears from being about the participants, and so we made them expendable. He came in
and you realized that immediately?
I mean, I wouldn't say immediate. Sometimes it takes a while to realize things.
I'm just asking in this situation, like how long did it take me to realize?
It wasn't long. It wasn't long, but it wasn't right away because it didn't happen right away. It was gradual, and then you come back and realize, when did this change happen? When did the decline start? Oh, when we made that shift. So.
Good, Lorraine?
I'm pondering.
I see it.
Lorraine, I could give you an example, but it would just show how utterly hard-headed I used to be. I still be sometimes, because it's like I instantly got the lesson, but like maybe a couple of months or something later, I was drag racing on a highway, which I wasn't supposed to be doing anyway. Got in an accident, flipped the car 6 times. Saw my life flash in front of me, all of that.
Going to flip 6 times.
Yeah, and they actually said if it happened, if it rolled the 7th time, that roll cage wasn't going to save me. That'd have been it, right? So you would think, after that experience, that's it. And there wasn't any stuff like that for a while. And then I'm in Curacao, and I'm not driving this time, I'm shotgun. And the guy's drag racing on, there's this massive bridge in Curacao over where they allow the ships to come in and whatnot. And he loses control, and the car spins out and almost goes over the side of the bridge. Again, light flashes in front of you and whatnot, right? So you would think after that. But yeah, sometimes the lessons come swift, no pun intended, but fast and furious. And sometimes you just don't. As much as it comes, you're like, maybe I'll try that one more time.
I was really just try it at least twice.
Not just to try it at least twice, because the first time you might be nervous, right? That is my takeaway.
It's important. You might be nervous.
I hear you, bro.
I'll tell you, it gets you through a lot of things in life. You gotta try it twice.
So, yeah, that text from 1 Kings 12 was pivotal for me because it established an idea that to me was profound that I think when I reflect on, most of the things I've seen, or the way I've seen in God interacting with people, at least in the scripture, I find this to be true, and it was being described between humans and not between God, but the idea seems still to be profound. The scripture, the verse we read it, but it says, "So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day." And I wrote, "Rejection of established authority is considered rebellion." So they were like, "Yeah, we're not letting you rule us anymore." And I then went on to say, "Continuing to recognize and accept established authority is considered loyalty or faithfulness," which is what you see God describe David as.
Say that last part again.
But this is what I wrote, right? This is what
No. Yeah, yeah. Let's say that.
continuing to recognize and accept an established authority is considered loyalty and faithfulness. So let's just talk about the kingdom. If they had continued to accept the house of David and David's descendants as their king, they would have been loyal and faithful, because that's what happened. The very next verse is, only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David. They're the only ones who continue to allow this king to rule over them and to be subject to whatever he says.
Mm-hmm.
And when I start to think about it, even to Courtney's point about this, the whole sum of the matter, is to fear God and give glory to him, right? That fear is that respect, that submission to his authority. When I think about what it means to be a follower of Christ, is to accept Jesus as Lord, as this authority. And when I accept him as authority, I listen to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit guides me and guides my actions. I don't always get it right. But like David, when he comes in and like a father says, "Yo, in my house, we don't act like that," I like, "Yes, daddy." And I take my punishment and I try to do better, right? But the people who are being described as rebellious are the people who set themselves up as equal, or for people who follow in basketball. When the Nets got swept by the Celtics, right, at the press conference, Kyrie Irving says, "Yeah, so Katie and I, when the season is done, we will, have to see how we're going to manage this franchise with Joe and then the general manager and whatnot." And he's like, the player is talking about how we going to manage the team with the management of the team. And that's when the team owners are like, "Well, nah. You either need to know your place on this team as the player, whose input we may consult because we value your input, but you're not managing this team with us," right? And I think about when God says that these people abandoned and forsook me, he wasn't always talking about how they left him altogether. That abandonment and forsaking is the bringing in of something else and putting it on the same level. Mm-hmm. By doing that, they abandoned him. Sometimes the idea may be conjured up in our minds that they put him out altogether, like, "We don't want nothing from you." But once they brought something in alongside and put it in the same level, now you have two kings. And you can't serve two masters. You either love one or hate the other, because when both your jobs call you to work at the same time, when you have two jobs, which one are you going to? The one you love more, right? So once they come in conflict, then you get to see. And I think that to me is kind of where this picture starts to come together, where God's statement about David begins to make sense, and God's statement about Jeroboam begins to make sense. The getting rid of Saul makes sense. The treatment of Nebuchadnezzar makes sense. Jesus's significance is even more, because his whole purpose was whatever the Father wants, right? I'm not here to do my own will. It's not about what I feel. Father, this cup could be taken, but yet not my will.
Mm-hmm.
Like it all kind of, even the three angels' messages, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth. And that worship isn't bow down and praise and sing songs. That worship is acknowledge him and give subservience to him, right?
I have a question.
Yeah. One more thing. And so when we were talking about the wandering, I really like Sharika's illustration of the boundary testing. That kind of gives me more language and framework around what it could look like and illustratively what the dynamic is. It's when there will be a testing of the boundary as my relationship grows. But when I posture myself to stay within the boundary that's established or that I come to learn,
Mm-hmm.
that's the relationship that he's seeking from each of us. And that will look different for each of us. But that's something that we all will have to experience in our own way. Lauren, your question.
So obviously this question is not applying all the time, but can you learn boundaries without testing it yourself?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's why we have the Bible. The Bible is a story about God and his boundaries.
I disagree. I think you can get an idea of the boundaries. But to know the true boundaries, you got to test them yourself. And the reason why I say that, because if we're saying that your relationship with God is an individual relationship,
Mm-hmm.
then there is a possibility of treating. Will God stray away from the idea that killing is wrong? Maybe not. But we also know that we've seen in the Bible the difference between killing and murder. And to know which one applies to you, you'd have to test it. Does that mean that we should go around killing? No, we understand that the idea of death is not good. But to know the true boundary, I'd have to test it. I just have an idea of what it is.
Can you give me, sorry, Jerry, can you give me an example in Jesus' life where he appears to test the boundary?
It's hard for me. Jesus is a hard example because he helped make the boundaries. So, Cliff, don't laugh at me.
You threw a lob pass up for Cherie going out, man. You knew she was going to hit you with that.
Right? When you help make the boundaries, it's hard. I would say, even in the case of David, I'm sure David was aware of thou shalt not kill. Sure of that. That wasn't up for discussion. I did it. Also, I wasn't completely cast out. I understand that you don't want me to do it in that context unless you tell me to do it. No problem. I got it.
So I guess Lauren's question is, will your bones get stronger if you break them? Yes. Do you have to break your bones to get your bones stronger? No.
That's my point. Like, I took it as her saying, can I know the boundaries if I don't test them? I have an idea of what the boundaries are. I don't know what they are for me because it's an individual relationship, but I can infer that there are, the line is over there. I don't necessarily need to go over there, but I can make references based on how he's treated others biblically or even in current day. There's just certain things he may not like or certain things he does like.
So, like, for example, with your friend with coming late. So if you had told her, don't come late, I feel like if you come late, it's disrespectful, blah, blah, blah. And she doesn't come late because you told her, don't come late. So she learned your bound. Do you think she just inferred that there's a potential that you might be upset if she comes late and she just doesn't come late? Or does she just be like, she said she feels fine and disrespectful, I'm not going to come, that's her line? Or did you feel like she had to test it, like, okay, she really meant that?
She did, because I sent them multiple messages. yo, I don't like when people are late. I don't want you to be late. I want to start on time. I don't like those things. It's not the first time she's heard me say it. She's heard me say it to other people.
Okay, so not till she tested it, you're saying, then she really understood.
She never understood what it would mean if she did it to me.
But here's the thing, though. And maybe this is what Lauren is sitting at. There are people who, if I say something to them and I tell them, look, I don't roll that way, I always feel like I'm more respected by the people who take my word for it and don't test it than the people who are like, no, let me try it anyway and see. Because to me, it is disrespectful.
Oh, but here's the thing, Jerome. Again,
and I guess then I have a decision to make what I do with them.
Exactly. How you react to it is an individual way, right? Like, so your daughter running the joke, it wasn't like, yo, my girl, oh yeah, talk to so like, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Versus it might be somebody else be like, yo, really? That's what we're trying to do? That doesn't mean that my boundary wasn't tested. But you could easily say, do you have a son, Jerome?
My grace was sufficient.
No. So for instance, I know people that say as a man, they have certain boundaries for their daughter that they don't necessarily have for their son.
Yeah.
And it's the same line that gets crossed, but how they react to it is very different and very different on the relationship and the person that they're with. So that's my point. We have an idea of what disrespect looks like, but what is that consequence of the disrespect or what comes as a result of disrespect only shows up once I do it myself, because it's not the same for me as it is to you, as it is to Courtney.
So the consequence, experiencing the consequence or knowing what the consequence is I think, different from what Lorraine is asking, which I think, and Lorraine, you can correct me if I don't understand your question, I think she's asking more along the lines of, do I have to cross the boundary to know where it is? Can I know it another way? And
so here's the question, Jared. If I cross the boundary, okay.
So I'm going to use Adam and Eve. Did they have to eat the fruit to know what the boundary was?
They had an idea, in my opinion, of what the boundary was. So here's the question I have, I guess. What's the point of a boundary if nothing happens as a result of it, of crossing?
That's the difference. They didn't have to eat the fruit to know what the boundary was. They had to eat the fruit to understand what the consequences were.
Is it a boundary if nothing happens if I cross it?
It is, because what it comes down to is, are you doing something for consequence or for relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So what if I don't?
If they didn't cross the boundary, it's because they were so heavily focused and valued the relationship so much. But they went doing their own thing and crossing the boundary because it's like, I want to do what I want to do more. And it took the consequence to get them to understand, nope, this relationship really matters. I really shouldn't be messing around with this. You remember that text where Christ says, blessed are those who not seeing believe? I have the revised Jerome version of that where I basically say, blessed are those who not testing do. So it's like God gives you a request, you do it. You don't have to. And I think that sometimes is when you can be, and certainly even in my life, again, like with my closest friends and associates, I'd rather you show loyalty by not testing. Don't test and be like, my man. No, don't do that. Please don't. Please. But that's just me. I mean, Sharika, let's be real. If you were dating a guy and you tell him, look, he's asking you likes and dislikes, and you're like, yeah, I never like if a guy raises his voice at me. If he really values you and where the relationship is heading and respects you, he should never test that boundary. Let me see what will happen. I wonder what would happen if. Just don't test it.
If I pop this balloon.
Try me now. Try me.
Don't scare Donald and his dog.
I see what you're saying. I guess for me, do boundaries exist without consequence? That's the question I have.
Well, there's always a consequence, right? Because the consequence could just be how the other person now views you.
Yeah, so
how you've now made this person that you supposedly care about this person you're in a relationship with, how they feel valued or undervalued or respected or disrespected or any number of things.
I would. I like
no, they do not.
Say again. Go ahead, Cliff. Sorry, say that again.
I'm sorry, I had to rethink that. No, they do not.
They do not exist if they're not tested.
No, the boundaries do not exist if there's no consequences.
Oh,
The very nature of a boundary is that there's consequences behind crossing the boundary. If there's no consequence behind it, then there's no boundary.
agreed. But do I have to experience the consequence to know what the
That's a
boundary
different
is?
question. Yeah.
So I think about it like a fence, because a fence is a boundary, right?
Mhm.
I can see the fence and know the fence goes all the way around there, and that my play area is everywhere up to the fence. I can clearly see the boundary and know where it is. It's a fence.
Mhm.
I don't have to go over the fence to appreciate the boundary.
But you only know that it's a boundary because you think you shouldn't go over it. Like, what if it's just happens to be there? And I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying, like, when we say we're fenced in, it's because someone is putting me in check, whether
Right.
it's physically or mentally. But you
So
know that it's to control.
So there's some boundaries that you don't realize you shouldn't cross. You just think it's a fence for decoration. There are some of those, but then there are some where the person tells you, or the parent tells you, Jared, you can play anywhere, but don't go over the fence. And they don't tell you why, but they tell you don't go over the fence. Play anywhere else. At that point, you are now clear that it is a boundary when they communicate that.
It's a control.
It's not always a control because I would say it's more of a in some instances it could just be a preference, and it's a preference where I now respect your preference because I value relationship, but you don't control me. You're not controlling me by that because
I
I
don't think
have
it's a control of self. It's a control of action.
No, it's not a control of action because I have choice to do or not to do.
I put the boundary there to control the actions that you take. Whether or not you allow me to control those actions is up for discussion. The minute you don't allow me to control them is the minute that I experience your consequence.
I guess maybe in some instances, many instances.
Courtney, we didn't hear you.
Oh, my fault. I just realized I was on mute. I was like, what if the fence has a sign on it that says, hey, beware of dog? You don't see the dog. Or they say this fence says, hey, behind this fence, there's some high voltage.
A landmine,
there.
a minefield. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still control. It's still me controlling you. And I think someone in the chat says, if you can't change your boundary, that's control. It's control. I want to put a control on this situation. And you crossing it is whether or not you're going to allow me to control you in this situation. It's a control mechanism.
I don't think it's a control of.
I say that in the most innocent way of control, not negative or positive. Control has no emotion. I'm simply saying it's a control mechanism.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a control of the other person.
No. Just your behavior in this position. I am looking to control what you do, not you, but what you do in this situation.
Yeah, but Sharika, if we go back to the example of me and my foibles, there's a speed limit. There's a law about drag racing on highways, that whole 9 yards. They're not trying to control me. I damn near killed myself.
They're trying
and it's not like the government is like, the penalty for breaking the speed limit shall be ride off your car and come within an inch of your life. That's not, gravity is gravity. Is gravity the universe trying to control me? That's just a boundary. If I choose to jump off a building, the end result is
they're trying to control what you do in that moment. I am trying to control you from not making this 80-mile-per-hour thing. Now, I can't guarantee what's going to happen because clearly you fought that a couple times and it kept going. However, it is a control mechanism.
So let's use the example of gravity then. So that is what God trying to it's a boundary, but it's a boundary that keeps the universe in check. He's not trying to control anything.
It
Were it not for
controls
gravity,
our balance.
we can breathe, right?
It controls our balance. I can't just roam. I can't just float. It's a control mechanism. I can't disobey it. Like I can't. The minute I do, I die. Right. The minute I try to leave this hemisphere, and disobey gravity in my purest form, I die. It's a control mechanism, and then we don't like the word control because we put a negative perspective on it. But anything that I cannot control the boundary, if I cannot change the boundary and it is set by something outside of me, it's a control mechanism.
Yes. Control of what is the question?
Of the behavior in that moment, not necessarily the person. That doesn't mean now that Jerome, for example, they can't control you and not pressing the gas, right? But I'm trying to control your behavior in that moment. And to Courtney's point, beware of dog. I'm trying to control your behavior in that moment. You come over here if you want, regardless if you see this pit or this Rottweiler or this Cane Corso. But I'm trying to control what you do.
Or
it's not a boundary if there's no control.
You can continue how you're going right now, or this is the end. That's it.
I can't guarantee it's the end. I can simply tell you that there is consequences on the other side of this that may or may not happen.
So protection is control, I'm guessing is what you're saying?
So yeah, protection is not necessarily control. Like, so if I'm giving you a piece of advice, I am not trying to control you.
Not you.
I'm not trying to control your behavior. So yes, there are instances, and I like the browser settings where you can't change it. That's control. But something like beware of dog is not a control of behavior at this basic level. It's not saying do or don't do. It's just having you be mindful of the fact that the dog is here, and then you make your own informed decision. It's not a don't come in because there's a dog. That is an attempt at control the behavior. Beware of dog. Unless bewaring is a control. I just want you to be attentive, and that's the control. But I don't even see that as being.
I see beware as a disclaimer. It's like, well, there's a dog here, so you do what you want to do, but there's a Cane Corso here, so if you come over and if you get mauled to death, it's just a disclaimer.
Yeah, and that's why I say I don't see them all as being
but that's also that's a boundary. That in
itself, I agree. That's why I'm saying I don't see all boundaries as an attempt at control. That's all.
But boundaries control what I can do. Like they back me into a certain arena, whether it's mental, spiritual, physical, or whatever. They box me in. And they control what happens. I'm boxed in. That in itself, the box is the control. What I do leaving it, whatever happens there is whatever. But some
boundaries are closed, some are open, some are semi-permeable, allow some things and not let other things in. So it's not always a control thing. Like you can free to step out. So you're not controlling the person. You're just saying this is the boundary. Some boundaries are closed. That's where control come in. You cannot come outside of this thing.
But I don't know that. My point in Lorraine is I'm not looking at control as in linear, right? I'm not saying it's one way or the other. I'm saying I don't know what is open or closed. The way it's set up as a boundary in itself is a control. What you do with it, you find out what it means. If it's open, closed, linear, whatever, it's up to you.
Right.
But the idea of it being boxed in is a control. I stay within these boundaries is a control by default.
Right.
So,
now it doesn't put God in the best light. Right?
So yes. So yes, if I am establishing a boundary around, it's a control for my space, right? If I put the fence around my house, it's a control for my space. But it's not necessarily a control for you.
It is a control for you to understand what's mine and if you want to cross it. you take the consequences of crossing into my space. If you trespass on my property and I happen to pew pew, that's something that you took. You took the risk. You're now in my control. Or you're under my circumstances.
That is a consequence. Or I just put up the boundary just to mark off what is mine.
Why? Why would I want to mark it off if I don't want to have some sort of control over the circumstance? Why mark it off then?
Because I paid for it. I mean, so if it's like a land thing, I know all of this is my land, so I put a wall around it.
Why? So you want to control what happens on that land, right?
Even if I would control what happens whether I put up the fence or not, right? So the putting up of the fence is not always an attempt to control what's going in. I still have control over that, whether there's a fence or not. Particularly if you're talking about boundary in terms of property.
So boundaries in terms of property, right? Let even if we go there, you know what you own. Why do you need to let me know what you own? You know what's yours. What difference does it make?
Exactly, but the boundary line is still there.
No, but I don't know that.
Exactly.
So here's the thing: if we now in court, this is what's going to play out. Because I was looking at land. If you say you own that land, and I say you don't know that land, and it's abandoned land, and I drop my house on it, how'd I know it was yours, Jared?
Well, first of all, you're not supposed to build a house without checking for the boundary zone. So that's how you know. First of all, whether I put the fence up or not.
That's also not true. One can.
You're not supposed to.
One can capture land depending on how long that this part has not been used. But anyway, we can go into that. What I'm simply saying is, how do I know?
Janet Jackson said it.
Wow, Cliff. Wow. Yeah.
There would be no. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think I see what you're saying, Sharika, where a boundary is. It's some sort of control mechanism. It may not be controlling a person, but it is some sort of control mechanism. Because even thinking with like my property, I have kids, I have a dog. I don't want them just running out wildly into the street, right? So there's a wall and gates, and they can't just, So my interest in it may not be controlling people coming in so much as controlling what's going on the compound, right? Going back to your point.
But Jerry, there's some people who just like to see the thing. They're not trying to control people coming in or they're coming out. They just want to have a demarcation.
Yeah, they want to say, is this the great
awareness that there is a boundary.
Yeah. So I think I'm going back to what I said earlier. I see her logic. It makes sense. It can be contextual sometimes, but then the other side of it is, is it really a boundary if there's no consequence? Because
no, there isn't.
There isn't, because and that's why I'm getting all the cheek I'm getting from my daughter, because she's like, boundary. What? Where's it at? Yeah. And then you see where, even with adults, it's the same thing. So like, if your friend Shrika was late or your friends were late and you never had a conversation with them after it, or you never, even if you keep having the conversation, they keep coming late and nothing ever changes. They're like, yeah. The day there's a consequence, they be like,
I don't know, Jerry. I don't know if I agree with that, because if I communicate it, it's still a boundary, whether you've continued to violate it or not. I don't necessarily have to enact some kind of
consequence.
I think the consequence enough is me communicate. That in itself is a consequence. If we're going to talk about what consequence.
Fair enough. It shouldn't have to be more than that. It shouldn't have to be more than that.
I'm motivated because, at least I can speak to me. This is me. I know what I want to do at this time. And so therefore I set up this boundary so that I can control what happens after this. Not control in a negative, controlling someone's time, space, or who they are, but I want to be able to control the narrative after this time. So I set this boundary and saying, I hate these things, because I then lose control and I'm no longer able to steer the ship the way I wanted to if it doesn't arrive on the times that I want it to arrive. That's why I set the boundary, because I lose control.
So
It's a control mechanism. God set certain boundaries because he loses control after a certain point. Like, this doesn't work. Similar to Jeroboam. Hey, listen, I put this in place. There's these boundaries by which I want these things holding on. And if you I lose control when you step out of these things. Like, and so therefore I got to clear you out because my control is lost.
So did your friend have to test the boundary to know that the boundary was there? Did your friend have to be late to find out that you were serious about don't be late?
She had to. She knew it was there. Like it's like with God, he tells us all these things.
Right. That's okay. Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't understand the control that I have, that I'm trying. So it's like you are a piece of a larger puzzle. You've overvalued yourself in this situation to believe that you crossing this boundary is still okay, and the situation goes the same way it went. Right?
So like, is the consequence important? Is it important to know what the consequence is?
In this case, what I'm hearing you guys say is that boundaries are enforced by consequence.
No. I'm not saying that.
Okay, so what I'm simply saying is boundaries are means of control.
You are saying that, yes.
And I prefer your earlier narrative where you said it's a control mechanism.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't go as planned, if you violate me, then I lose control of what happens after.
So my question originally was, do you have to cross a boundary to know that the boundary is there?
No. No, you don't.
Are you still yes?
That's clear with a fence. You don't have to cross the fence to know that the fence is there. You don't.
Because I don't believe that boundaries exist outside of consequence, and I believe that consequences vary, I would say that I can see the boundary, but to know the true boundary, I would have to test it.
Or someone else could have tested it and you could learn from their experience.
Learn from their testing.
No, because it's an individual just fight.
Yeah, but Sharika, so let me ask you this example, using this question, using the example of the minefield. They say beyond the fence is a minefield. You see somebody hop the fence and get blown to bits. You want to hop the fence as well, just to prove that you might get lucky? What
I'm saying is, just because they blew up doesn't mean I'm going to blow up. It doesn't mean that I'll hop it, but it doesn't.
I understand that, but are you saying that in order to
prove that going over there equals death, I would have to go over there.
Yeah, but that's not the boundary. The boundary is there's a minefield.
I don't know what the mines are. So I can hop the fence and stand there for the rest of my life. And you'll be like, Sharika, this is a minefield. Did you die? I didn't. They did though, but I didn't.
So yes, but
you hopped something.
So there are a couple of equivalencies that are not necessarily true. The presence of a minefield does not equal death. And so, though it is true that the boundary is there for the minefield, going over it and not experiencing death doesn't mean that there wasn't a boundary and there isn't a minefield. One does not equal to the other.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the boundaries don't exist outside of consequence for me.
So boundaries are not always about consequences. There's sometimes safeguards, and that's the challenge I'm having with this, is that a boundary is not supposed to necessarily have a consequence. It can be a safeguard from consequences, and just because I go over there and don't experience the thing that the safeguard was from doesn't mean that the safeguard isn't there.
But the safeguard is control, Jared. It's still control.
It's an attempt at control, perhaps, but the presence of it does not the presence of it is, you can't measure the effectiveness of the boundary by whether you experience the bad thing or not. Yeah. So using the same example of the minefield, is there a boundary and a fence that says there's a minefield on the other side? Yes. If I go over and I don't experience being blown up, did the boundary exist? Yes. If I go over and I do get blown up, did the boundary exist? Yes. Both are true. The boundary is there whether I experience the consequence or not. The safeguard against being blown up exists whether I get blown up or not, and I don't have to go and get blown up. Because if I go and get blown up, then the safeguard didn't work, right? Because it didn't safeguard me. Because the boundary was in order to safeguard. So not all boundaries, and I'm just saying boundaries have multiple purposes and functions, and it's not always necessary to experience the consequence to perceive or appreciate the boundary.
So I can give you that. I can see where you're saying as far as the appreciation or lack of appreciation for the boundary does not need to experience consequence. I am stuck and firm on that. Even a safeguard is a control. A boundary
I'm not disagreeing with that, but okay. You don't have to experience the other side in order to.
Okay, I can give you that.
So Jared, if it's like, okay, you're in Holland and there's a seawall because the whole country is below sea level, and you're saying this seawall is a control mechanism?
Yeah, to control the sea from coming in.
Sometimes
but I guess going back to your point, Jared, somebody, how to put it, you don't have to cross the seawall. There's nothing really punitive if you jump over the seawall and you can swim or you can surf, then great for you. Or you want to sail your boat, great. So it's not that there's a material consequence per se to crossing the seawall. There is if you can't swim, and you don't have a boat and you whatever else, right? Or there is a consequence if the wall is breached. But for you just hopping over the wall into the water, then there's no real consequence. So it's not like there's a boundary that exists that you can appreciate, although there's no material consequence, assuming you can swim.
Correct.
So it sounds like we're talking about control, and then in another sense, we're talking about order. Like, I think those are like
control is order. Order is control.
Control is an attempt at order. Is an attempt at order.
Yeah.
Yes. Control is an attempt at order.
Order cannot exist without control.
Yeah, without controls. Yes.
It can't.
Yes, you need controls in order to have order. Yeah. But I was just saying that, not all boundaries are, do this and then that will happen. Some boundaries are just guideposts.
So, see, when you said that irks me again when you say it like that, because
I said some are, not all are. Not all are. And some are guideposts, some are cautionary, some are protection, they serve different purposes, but all of them are control functions.
So what I don't want people to walk away with, not y'all, others, is that control doesn't include choice. Because I could see someone walking away and saying, well, God is trying to control everything, so we really don't have any choice. That's not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying. I can't speak for everybody else, right? Because you can't establish order without controls, and so therefore God does have a lot of control, and is controlling certain things. But I think, Jared, to tie it up, what you're saying is you can hop over it if you want. That's where my pussy dog don't have the same luck. But that don't mean that I didn't put the control in place.
Correct. And you don't have to experience the consequence. Because if you do experience the consequence in some of these controls, then the control didn't work.
No, I think they're a lesson. It
did not succeed in its attempt to control your behavior to keep you safe.
That's assuming that I meant to keep you safe.
So that's what I'm saying. Some boundaries, the control that is attempting to, boundaries are control mechanisms, we'll agree to that. The control that I'm trying to enact with this boundary is to keep you safe. If you go over the boundary, then the control didn't work. I was not successful in controlling you.
And whatever wrath you get from me is on you.
Yeah.
So are we where are we landing? So the boundaries God puts up and shows us and makes us aware of in the Bible, do they all have to be tested, or can we just know them? So, I mean, not all, obviously, but can we be aware of some and just be like, all right, that's a line? Or do they have to be tested? Like, let's see if this is really a line.
I'll say this, Laurie. My understanding of the function of this book is to introduce God and his boundaries to us. I will agree that there is where Sharika is as well, because both can be true, that there are things about God that you could only learn in your personal experience with him.
Right.
But this becomes his attempt to give you a head start in understanding where his boundaries are. And so it's possible to learn from the experience of 1,500 years of him dealing with humans what his boundaries are. And so you can know that without having to bounce upon them. But I'm sure there are going to be instances, because we don't read it thoroughly, we don't pay attention, or we don't fully appreciate, and we don't take seriously some of
Or we don't interpret the boundary correctly.
Or we do like Adam and Eve. We know what the boundary was, but then we get more information and we wonder, well, is that really what the boundary is? And so we test it.
Right.
So it's all of that. But yes, you can see a fence. You can see a fence. The nature of fences that you can see them. And then there's some what they call, them invisible ones where you can't actually see, or the light, you have to be in the light. Yeah. Yeah. All right, but it is now 10:14. I think we kind of landed the plane on Lauren's question, and we've established the control mechanism and that a control mechanism can be appreciated without being tested. All right, takeaways. Gerald says he went first. I like that I can see the fence and sign. That's my takeaway.
Amen.
He did say from before, is God's control his 10 commandments to keep us safe? I would say it's a little bit more than that, but it includes that. I'm sorry, I see a rope happening right now. Y'all saying the same thing with different terms. That was earlier. He said that. All right, Courtney, you get to go first today.
Yeah, sure. First, I want to thank everybody for indulging me on my question earlier. I appreciate everybody's insight. Takeaway for me, I enjoyed that. Putting before us David's life and really what that difference was between him and Jeroboam and even Solomon. I didn't think about it like that. Him just staying in submission to God and his authority, no matter what he did. He had this posture of reverence, and he didn't reject that established authority. So I think that's something that I'm going to take as I watch, the rest of the reading of Old Testament for the rest of the week. In our Bible study we have on Sabbath afternoons, we're always asking, God said David was a man after my own heart, and we're still looking at all the things that he did that was off. And so this kind of gives me more insight. Like, all right, this is the frame of mind to look at. Like, as David was doing things, this is how he was in this submission to God. And this is why he speaks of him throughout the generations. It keeps referring back to him.
Word. I received that. Jerry?
I think for me, it's just that keeping your heart and mind in that right, that submissive posture where it's like, even if you test the boundary, you bounce back and you're like, yeah, that's my dude. Um, always understanding that it is about the relationship. Yeah, that is what matters most. And even if you mess up, like I said, you test a boundary, you come back to no, this relationship is what matters most.
Right.
I think it's true of your relationship with God. And who was it that said something about protecting relationships that are most important to us? So I think anytime a relationship is important to you, that same kind of
Lorraine.
that same kind of logic I think applies.
Right. How about you, Lorraine?
Um, a thought that kept coming up was I'm thankful for the Bible, because when we're talking about the fact that it's good for proof, it's good for correction, it's good for teaching. In your life, in your testing, the moments where you're testing or the moments where you're doing whatever, the Bible helps you to interpret what God's response is to what you're doing. Yeah, that's where
His response or his feelings about it?
yeah, here's how he feels about it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. How about you, Cliff?
Well, although 7 is a good number in the biblically, the number 7 is a good number. I learned that a roll cage is only good for 6 turns.
A road what?
A roll cage is only good for 6 turns. I'm just messing with you.
Got it. I heard it now. Okay.
I'm just messing, man. No, what my real takeaway is that God is willing to go to the utmost to save.
Yeah.
That's my true takeaway. Is that God is still trying to save me. That's it. I was just messing with you, Ron.
Bishop?
I learned that there is very little value for me in trying to understand the intricacies of relationships. What's most important is to admire the relationship itself.
Word. I would say that mine was that boundary image for articulating the submissive posture and staying within it, and the testing of the boundary but choosing to remain within it, and the significance of that for allegiance and faithfulness and loyalty and fear of God. That imagery resonated a whole lot for me. All right. I saw Amen, brother, but I missed it, so I'm not sure who it was for.
It was for Cliff.
For Cliff. All right. So Gerald said Amen, brother. I wasn't sure how soon that came in, if it came in when Courtney was talking or whatnot.
It might have been the 6 turns.
You're right. All right. Well, I like thank you for the conversation tonight. I appreciate where it went and how it all tied together. So Courtney, thank you for leading us out with that question, because it tied into some of the scripture stuff that we're going to look at today. And we are on every first and third Friday. I think we have 2 more Fridays before we close out our 8th year, Sharika. 2 more Fridays before we close out year 8. Wow. It's been a minute. I'm grateful to everyone, especially you guys, who's participated and been a part of this for that long. And looking forward to see what God does beyond year 8. If you haven't already got a copy of the reading plan, you can download it onto your phone from the Apple Store or the Google Play, or you can hit us up for a hard copy, because I use it with my Bible. We just use it to go through the Bible. It's been transformative, to say the least, to read the Bible in this format, in this way. So, yeah, we encourage you to join us if you don't already have a study plan, or if you just want to participate in our conversations. Anybody willing to pray for us tonight? Don't all jump up at once.
I'll pray.
All right, good.
No worries. All right, Father, we thank you once again for your grace and mercy, and for showing up. Lord, it is always good to get together and go over your word, to dissect it as best we can with the help of your Holy Spirit to give us guidance and understanding. We pray that we will continue to do that to the best of our ability with the help of the Holy Spirit. Now, bring us closer to you. Guide us in our choices and our decisions. May our relationship with you grow stronger each and every day, each and every moment. May we hear your voice more clear, so that our choices and decisions may be pleasing in your sight. Forgive us our sins. Touch all those that are under the sound of water for the thirsty with your blessings. For this is our prayer in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. I think the next time we're on is the 15th. That's right. So, hoping to see all of you then. And until then, drink up and drink deeply. See you guys. Have a good one.
All right.